My parents skipped my wedding to sip cocktails on a Florida beach. They smiled in photos with my sister, raising glasses to celebrate what they called family first. While I stood alone in my gown, staring at the two empty seats where they should have been, that was the moment I realized the truth. I was never part of their definition of family. But what came after was even worse. 1 week later, my father called, not to apologize, not to ask how the wedding went, but to demand that I pay $60,000 on a loan he had secretly tied my name to. That day, I made a choice. For the first time in my life, I stopped begging for their approval and I fought back. If you have ever had to stand up to someone who tried to belittle you, you will understand why this story matters. Before I share how I turned the tables on them, hit subscribe if you believe self-respect is worth protecting. And tell me this. What would you do if your own parents chose a vacation over your wedding? My name is Claire Morgan. I am 28 years old, and I live in Seattle. From the outside, my family looked picture perfect. A polished home in an upscale neighborhood. Parents with prestigious careers. An older sister who became a star surgeon. But behind closed doors, the truth was different. There was a strict pecking order. My parents, Harold and Evelyn, worshipped status above all else. My sister Rebecca was their pride. She could do no wrong. I was the disappointment, the one who never measured up. When Rebecca aced her exams, her report cards were taped to the fridge for weeks. When I did the same, my mother only nodded and said, "That is expected, not exceptional." When Rebecca got into medical school, they threw a party at the country club. When I graduated with honors in photography and business, they skipped the ceremony. They had a gala to attend. Even when I won a regional photography award that made the local paper, my father brushed it aside. He said photography is not a career. It is just a hobby. That word hobby haunted me. No matter how hard I worked, they never saw me as more than an afterthought. But I kept pushing. By 28, I had built a successful wedding photography business. My calendar was booked a year ahead. I owned my own condo. I had clients who trusted me with their most important memories. And still, when people asked my mother what I did, she smiled politely and said, "She is still figuring things out." So when Daniel, a kind teacher with a heart of gold, asked me to marry him, I hoped my parents might finally see me differently. Maybe they would show up. Maybe they would put aside their obsession with titles and see that I had found real happiness. I was wrong. Growing up in my parents' house felt like living in a permanent competition I never signed up for. On the outside, our two-story colonial looked perfect. White fence, fresh-cut lawn, a driveway with shiny cars. Neighbors used to tell me how lucky I was, but inside those walls, there was a clear scoreboard, and my name was never on top. Rebecca was the golden child. When she got an A on a math test, the paper went on the fridge like it was the Mona Lisa. Weeks later, it was still there, curling at the edges but proudly displayed. When I brought home the same grade, my mom barely looked up from her wine glass. She would smile and say, "That is expected, not exceptional," then go right back to her conversation about the next fundraiser. I still remember one night in high school. Rebecca announced she got into a summer program for future doctors. My parents opened champagne like it was New Year's Eve. Dad toasted to her brilliant future. That same week, I showed them a photo I had taken that won first place in the state art fair. My father glanced at it once and said, "Nice hobby, Claire. But you cannot make a life out of snapshots." That word hobby followed me everywhere. It was like a chain. Every time I felt proud of something, they used it to pull me back down. At family dinners, the comparisons were endless. Rebecca would talk about science projects and professors who adored her. My parents leaned in like she was telling secrets from heaven. When I spoke about photography club or my part-time job at a camera shop, they nodded politely and asked Rebecca another question. I learned early that silence was easier. Why speak up if no one listens? But silence comes with a price. I started believing them, believing that nothing I did would ever measure up, believing that love was something you had to earn through grades, titles, or job offers. The cruel part is, kids accept the rules they are given. If your parents tell you this sky is green, you believe it until someone shows you otherwise. My parents told me I was less, and for years I lived as if that were true. Yet even in that storm, a spark was there. My art teacher once lent me her old Nikon camera. I looked through the viewfinder and felt something wake up inside me. For the first time, I could see the world in a way no one else did. That camera gave me a voice when my own words never landed at the dinner table. And that small spark, the one they dismissed as a silly hobby, would one day become the very thing that saved me. Because when my parents finally betrayed me in the cruelest way, it was not just about missing my wedding. It went much deeper. Do you want to know how far they went? For a long time, I believed my parents when they said my passion was worthless. But then something happened that changed everything. I was photographing a small wedding for a couple who could barely afford the basics. The bride wore a borrowed dress. The groom's best suit had a rip in the sleeve, but the way they looked at each other was magic. I captured that moment, the joy, the raw love, and when I showed them the photos, they cried. They told me I had given them something they could keep forever. That night, I sat alone in my tiny apartment and realized this was not a hobby. It was my purpose. And then Daniel came into my life. I met him at another wedding. He was the best man, and he had this way of making everyone laugh without trying too hard. During the reception, he helped an elderly guest who was struggling to stand. Later, he played peekaboo with restless kids so their parents could eat in peace. I kept finding my camera drawn to him. Every time he smiled, it was like the room brightened. When the night ended and I was packing my gear, he walked over and said, "You are the one who notices everything, aren't you?" I laughed and said, "That is my job, to see what others miss." "Well, I noticed you too," he replied, and he handed me his number. Daniel was nothing like the men my parents would have approved of. He was not a doctor or a lawyer. He was a middle school teacher who loved his students more than anything. On our first date, he told me stories about his classroom, how he encouraged kids to draw when they felt anxious, how he made science lessons fun by turning them into games. The way he talked about his students made me fall for him instantly. He believed in nurturing kids for who they were, not who their parents wanted them to be. And the contrast with my own family was impossible to ignore. With Daniel, I felt seen for the first time. He valued me without conditions. I was not second place. I was not a disappointment. I was just me. And for him, that was enough. 6 months later, I introduced him to my parents. It went about as badly as I feared. My father shook his hand quickly, then changed the subject. My mother leaned close to me and whispered, "Teachers barely make anything. Is this really who you want to marry?" On the way home, Daniel asked why they seemed disappointed before they even got to know him. I told him the truth. They would react that way to anyone who was not a doctor, a lawyer, or a CEO. He held my hand and said, "Then that is their loss, because they are missing out on knowing a pretty, wonderful daughter." That was the moment I knew. He was the man I wanted to marry. But if you think my parents were cruel at that first meeting, wait until you hear what they did when we announced our wedding. When Daniel proposed on a chilly fall morning, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. He knelt down on damp leaves beside a waterfall we loved to hike to. No fancy setup, no photographer hiding in the bushes. Just him, me, and a simple ring. I cried before I even said yes. He pulled me into his arms and whispered, "I know I am just a teacher, but I promise to always support your dreams the way you support mine." I looked at him through tears and said, "You are never just anything. You are everything I want." We decided right away we wanted a small wedding. Something real. Not a performance for social media. A garden ceremony with close friends and family. Simple food, flowers from a local florist, and laughter filling the night. I called all of my friends and relatives first, saving the hardest call for last. My parents. When my mom answered, she sounded distracted. She said they were about to leave for a charity dinner. I told her the news with all the excitement in my voice. "Mom, Daniel proposed. We are getting married in June." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Well, congratulations, I suppose. Do you have a date yet?" "Yes, June 12th, a small garden wedding in Portland. I wanted you both there." "June is a busy month," she said flatly. "Your father has a conference. Rebecca is presenting at a medical symposium. The kids have their recitals. We will see what we can do." Her tone told me they had already decided. Still, I sent formal invitations in January. I even added a handwritten note begging them to be there. Weeks passed, no RSVP, no phone call, nothing. In March, I drove to their house to ask in person. I had not been there in almost a year. Everything looked the same. Perfect furniture that no one sat on. Walls covered with framed photos of Rebecca's career milestones. My own face barely appeared. Just one small picture from high school graduation tucked in the corner. My mother offered tea in delicate china cups like I was a guest in a stranger's home. My father sat straight in his leather chair, his expression cold. "We got your invitation," my mother said after a few minutes of small talk, "but I am afraid there is a conflict." "What conflict?" I asked. "The date has been set for months. Your sister's family is visiting that weekend." My father replied, "We have already made plans. Could they not come the week before or after?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is my wedding." His eyes hardened. "Rebecca is a surgeon with important responsibilities. Her children have schedules. She cannot rearrange everything for what is frankly a trivial event." My chest burned. A trivial event. That was how they saw the most important day of my life. But what I discovered later proved their excuse was far worse than I imagined. A few weeks before the wedding, I opened my phone and my heart sank. There on Instagram was my mother, smiling wide with a flower in her hair, my father raising a glass of wine, Rebecca and her husband lounging in beach chairs, my niece and nephew building sandcastles. The caption read, "Perfect family vacation in the Florida Keys, with the people who matter most." The timestamp made my stomach twist. They were there on the exact weekend of my wedding. It was never about a conflict. It was never about Rebecca's schedule or recitals. They had planned a tropical getaway and chosen it over me. I scrolled through post after post, sunrise over the ocean, a fancy seafood dinner with lobsters as big as their plates, my father in a Hawaiian shirt I had never seen before, holding up a cocktail. Meanwhile, on my wedding day, the chairs meant for them sat empty. Do you know what it feels like to see your entire family laughing on a beach while you walk down the aisle without them? It feels like the air has been punched from your lungs. When I showed the photos to Daniel that night, I cried so hard my body shook. He held me and whispered, "I am so sorry, Claire, but maybe this is the proof you need. They never intended to show up." I wanted to believe they were careless, that maybe it was bad timing, but the truth stared at me in every single picture. They had replaced my wedding with a vacation. They were celebrating family, just not mine. The next morning, I called my mother. She answered on the third ring. I could hear waves and laughter in the background. I asked her why she was in Florida when she had told me they were too busy to come. She sighed and said, "Rebecca only had certain dates off. The kids had activities. We had prior commitments." Prior commitments. That was how she described a beach trip that replaced my wedding. Would it have made a difference if you had told me the truth? I asked. Her voice was calm. No, the result would have been the same. We had more important obligations. Those words sliced deeper than anything she had ever said to me. More important, I was less important than a vacation. Less important than lobster dinners and beach photos. I hung up without saying goodbye. I stared at my phone until the screen went black. And in that silence, something in me finally broke. But that was only the beginning, because 1 week later, my father called again, and this time, what he wanted from me was far worse than just forgiveness. 1 week after my wedding, my phone would not stop buzzing. 7 missed calls, 3 voicemails, all from my father. At first, I thought maybe something had happened, maybe an accident, maybe finally some regret about missing my wedding. But when I listened to the first voicemail, my stomach dropped. "Claire, call me back right away. It is about the Madison property loan." Loan. My blood ran cold. The second voicemail was worse. "The bank is threatening legal action. Call me immediately." By the third one, his voice was panicked. "They are demanding payment. This is serious. You need to help." I sat frozen on a park bench with my camera bag at my feet. I remembered the day 3 years earlier when he had asked me to co-sign that loan. He told me it was just a formality, that it would help him with taxes, that he would take care of everything. I was so desperate for his approval that I signed without asking more questions. Now he wanted me to cover $60,000 in missed payments. When I finally called him back, he answered on the first ring. Where have you been? This is an emergency. I was working, Dad. What is going on? The management company failed. The building has been half empty. I assumed rent was covering the loan, but cash flow is tight after Florida. He stopped. He knew what he had just revealed. After Florida. So while I was saying my vows, they were drinking on the beach, with money that should have gone to the bank. How many payments have you missed? I asked. 3, he said quickly. But we can fix it if you transfer the money. This is family, Claire. Your credit is at stake too. Family, the same family that left my wedding seats empty. The same family that toasted each other in Florida while I walked down the aisle alone. And now they wanted me to save them. I hung up that night with my hands shaking. For 30 years they had treated me like I was less. And now I had to decide if I was finally done. But before I made that choice, I needed to know the full truth. And what I uncovered made me realize the betrayal went even deeper than I thought. The next morning, I met with a financial advisor. I wanted every detail about that loan, every payment, every report, every notice. And what I found made my blood boil. The Madison property had never been fully rented. From the very beginning, it was losing money. The management company had sent reports every month, reports that my father simply ignored. Even worse, the records showed the exact dates payments stopped, right around the time my parents booked their Florida trip. So while I was budgeting for a modest garden wedding, they were draining money from a failing property to sip cocktails on the beach. And then they had the nerve to ask me for $60,000 to cover it up. I went home that night and spread all the documents across the kitchen table. Daniel sat with me in silence as I highlighted dates and numbers. It was all there in black and white. My parents had lied to me for years. About the loan, about their money, about their so-called perfect life. They were living way beyond their means, helping Rebecca buy her big house, paying for private school for her kids, keeping up appearances at country clubs, and now, when it all came crashing down, they wanted me to clean up their mess. Daniel looked at me and said softly, "Claire, you do not owe them your savings. You do not owe them your future. You have already given them enough." For the first time in my life, I believed him. I realized that my parents were not just careless. They were willing to sacrifice my financial security to protect their image. To them, I was not a daughter. I was a safety net. That night, I decided something I never thought I could. I was not going to pay them a dime. But if I was going to say no, I wanted to do it in a way they would never forget. The next evening, I called my father. My voice was calm, almost too calm. "Dad," I said, "I have reviewed all the financial records." There was a pause. "How did you even get those?" he asked. I reminded him, "I am a co-signer. I have every legal right." He tried to brush it off. "That is not the point. Have you arranged the transfer?" "No," I said. "I have not." His voice sharpened. "Claire, do not play games. Your credit is on the line, too. You need to send the money." I took a deep breath. "Do you remember when you called my wedding a trivial event?" Silence. "Well," I said, "that is exactly how I feel about your loan. Trivial, not worth my time." He sputtered. "What did you just say?" I repeated it slowly so he could not miss a word. "Trivial, just like my wedding was to you." I could almost hear his face turning red through the phone. He exploded. "You cannot do this to us. We are your parents." I laughed, but it was bitter. Parents show up. Parents protect their children. You chose a beach vacation over me, and now you expect me to save you. His tone turned desperate. "Your mother will be devastated." Think about the family. I thought about it, about the empty chairs at my wedding, about the photos of them smiling in Florida, about the years of being treated like I was less. And then I said the words that had been building inside me for 30 years. "I am done cleaning up your mess." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. But for the first time in my life, I felt free. Daniel looked at me with pride in his eyes. "You finally said it," he whispered. But little did I know that one phone call would set off a storm in the family, and the fallout was uglier than I ever imagined. The fallout started almost immediately. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing again. Not from my parents this time, but from cousins, aunts, and even my grandmother. The messages all sounded the same. "How could you abandon your parents in their time of need? How could you be so cold?" One cousin left me a voicemail saying I was being childish and selfish. My aunt sent me a long text about family loyalty. Even my grandmother called to ask if I really refused to help my poor father. Not one of them mentioned my wedding. Not one of them asked how it felt to walk down the aisle without my parents there. It was like the entire family had agreed on one story: that I was the villain, that I had turned my back on them over money. 3 days later, Rebecca finally called. Her tone was sharp from the first word. "You need to fix this. Claire, Dad is a wreck. Mom cries every night." I almost laughed. Where was all this concern when my chairs sat empty at my wedding? I asked her directly, "How was Florida?" She did not even flinch. "Is that what this is about? You are punishing them because they missed your wedding. Grow up. Life is not all about you." The irony nearly knocked me over. She, the golden child, telling me life was not all about me. I told her calmly, "This is about boundaries and consequences. Dad put my financial future at risk without asking me. Then he expected me to bail him out right after showing me how little my milestones matter to any of you." She tried to defend them. "The kids had activities. My schedule is impossible. We planned that trip for months." And yet, I said, "Somehow you all managed to make time for Florida. Just not for my wedding." There was a pause. For the first time, she did not have a quick comeback. Finally, she said coldly, "You have always been jealous of me. This is just your way of getting attention." I shook my head. I do not want their attention anymore. I just want basic respect. The line went silent before she hung up. I thought the storm had passed, but I was wrong. Because the real shock came not from Rebecca. It came from someone I never expected. The shock came when Aunt Karen called me. Now, Aunt Karen was my mom's younger sister. Growing up, she had always been kind but quiet. She never got in the middle of family drama. She showed up to holidays with a smile, made her famous apple pie, and left before anyone started fighting. So when her name popped up on my phone, I almost did not answer. I expected another lecture about loyalty, but her first words stunned me. "Claire, I am proud of you." I froze. Proud of me. Nobody in my family had ever said that out loud. She went on, Your mother has played favorites your whole life. We all saw it. Nobody wanted to admit it, but I think it is about time someone stood up to them. I could feel tears burning in my eyes. Aunt Karen told me she and Uncle Jack had both been furious when my parents skipped my wedding. She said she had wanted to call me right then, but held back to avoid more family drama. She said, "Do not let anyone convince you that setting boundaries is selfish. It is healthy. You are not abandoning family. You are just refusing to be treated like less." Her words hit me harder than all the criticism I had been drowning in. For once, someone in my family was actually on my side, and she was not the only one. Later that week, my cousin Danielle texted me, "Welcome to the other side. It is lonely sometimes, but so much healthier. Call me if you need to talk." Even my Uncle Peter, my dad's brother who rarely said much, sent me an email saying he admired my independence. He told me he wished he had stood up to his own parents when he was younger. For the first time, I realized something important. Maybe I was not as alone as I thought. Maybe there were people in my family who saw the truth. They had just been too afraid to say it until now. Their support gave me the strength to hold firm. I was not going to give my parents a dime, and I was not going to let them rewrite the story. But of course, my parents had other plans, and the next move they made left me absolutely speechless. A week after Aunt Karen's call, I thought maybe things were settling down. Then an envelope arrived in my mailbox, thick, official-looking, with my father's law office stamped in the corner. Inside was a letter. It accused me of being irresponsible. It claimed I was abandoning family, and at the very bottom, it warned that unless I transferred the money, they would be forced to take further action. My own parents had basically threatened to sue me. I sat there staring at the letter, my hands shaking. I could not believe it. After everything, after skipping my wedding, after lying about Florida, after draining money for years, now they wanted to drag me into court. Daniel picked up the paper and read it twice. Then he tossed it back onto the table. "You know what this is. It is intimidation. They think they can scare you into paying." He was right. That letter was not about the law. It was about power. It was about control. It was the last weapon they had left. So I did something I never thought I would do. I lawyered up, with the help of a real estate attorney. I negotiated directly with the bank. I showed them the records, the proof that I had never handled the property, the proof that my father had ignored notices while vacationing. And slowly, piece by piece, I pulled myself free. The bank agreed to remove my name from the loan. My credit would take a temporary hit, but nothing I could not recover from. When my father realized I had gone around him, he called me screaming. He said I had betrayed the family, that I would regret this for the rest of my life. But for once, his words did not stick. I felt lighter than I ever had, because I finally understood the truth. This was not about money. This was about respect, about finally proving to myself that I was worth more than the scraps they had given me my entire life. But just when I thought I had put it all behind me, something happened that I never saw coming, and it changed everything. What happened next was not revenge, it was freedom. When the bank officially released me from the loan, I felt like chains had fallen off my shoulders. My parents tried to twist the story to the rest of the family. But this time I did not care. I had the truth. I had my life, and most importantly, I had peace. It took me 30 years to realize that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop chasing people who will never value you. Family is supposed to love unconditionally, but when they do not, you are allowed to walk away. I learned that your worth is not tied to titles or paychecks. It is not measured by how well you fit someone else's idea of success. Your worth is yours from the start, and the people who truly love you will see it without conditions. My life did not fall apart when I set boundaries. It finally began. My marriage grew stronger, my business thrived, and for the first time, I felt truly happy in my own skin. So here is what I want to leave with you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who refused to respect you? Did it feel selfish at first, or did it make you stronger? Because sometimes the hardest part of standing up for yourself is taking that first step. But once you do, you will never look back. If my story resonated with you, I would love for you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And remember this: the family you create with love, with respect, with support, will always mean more than the family who only showed up when it was convenient. So choose yourself, because you are worth it.